Tonight at 10, political turmoil in France disrupts King Charles's planned state visit. He'll now head to Berlin instead of Paris for his first trip as monarch. There have been violent protests this week in the French capital and elsewhere over President Macron's plan to force through a rise in the pension age without a vote in Parliament. King Charles and Camilla were due to be in France for 3 days, but with more street protests planned, President Macron asked them to delay.
Et nous manquerions d'un certain bon sens.
We'd have lacked common sense if we'd proposed a state visit of His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort in the midst of the protests.
We'll be looking at how a visit that was meant to celebrate Anglo-French relations has turned into a major embarrassment for France. Also on the programme. School inspections in England will continue, says the head of the watchdog Ofsted, after a head teacher took her own life when her school was downgraded.
My legal name is Gwyneth Kate Paltrow.
Not her usual stage, the actress Gwyneth Paltrow gives evidence in court in a case sparked by a skiing accident. How a Russian child's drawing against the war in Ukraine saw her taken from her father after her school complained. She hasn't been seen since. And a chorus of approval from fans as the BBC singers are saved from being silenced by budget cuts.
On BBC London, 2 men have been found guilty of robbing the boxer Amir Khan at gunpoint for his watch. Police are now warning that high-end watch thefts are getting more violent.
Good evening. The turmoil in France, with escalating protests and violence over its government's proposed pension reforms, led today to the postponement of King Charles's visit there this weekend. The trip was due to have been the King's first visit abroad, but President Macron said that with more protests planned for Tuesday, it would be inappropriate for the royal couple to travel. Mr. Macron's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64 has faced stiff opposition, but it was his decision to force through the reforms, bypassing a vote in Parliament, that has caused the storm. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell, who's live for us in Paris tonight. But first, our correspondent Lucy Williamson reports.
The violence at protests here yesterday has left its mark on France's streets and on its diplomatic landscape too. With another day of action planned for Tuesday, France's president was forced to make a choice.
Je pense que nous ne serions pas sérieux.
We'd have lacked common sense if we'd proposed a state visit of His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort in the midst of the protests.
Au milieu des manifestations.
President of France.
Authorities here were reportedly worried about staged events that might embarrass the royal party and embarrass France during the King's visit. Many protesters say their own president is acting like a king from France's past, remote, undemocratic and out of touch. That image has only grown since he forced his pension reform into law last week without Parliament's approval, and then went on television to justify it. Bastien was one of those at the protest yesterday. We met him again tonight to ask what he made of the decision to postpone the royal visit.
When you have a Republican monarch like Macron and a real monarch like Charles III dining together at Versailles, I mean, it's bad publicity. And I think it's a victory for us to have the visit cancelled, because we know why it has been cancelled. So yes, I think it's a victory and we are quite happy about it.
Emmanuel Macron is determined to prove he's the reformist president he promised to be. In the face of opposition from Parliament and protesters, he stood firm. But when it came to the royal visit, he blinked. The threat of embarrassment on the world stage, more potent than the threat of unrest at home. In Place de la République tonight, police stood guard against spontaneous unrest. This battle between president and protesters isn't over, and Mr. Macron knows there could be a price to pay. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Let's speak now to Nick Witchell, who's in Paris. This must be a disappointment for the King, Nick.
Yes, I think very much so. This was a significant visit, the first of his reign. France deliberately, specially chosen for that honour. It would have been the symbolic sealing of this important reset in the Franco-British relationship. Now, that will still happen. The visit will be rescheduled, but it won't be the first visit of his reign. For President Macron, very embarrassing, humiliating perhaps. He cannot guarantee the streets. Now, there was no question of a physical threat to the king. What there was concern that it could all become extremely unseemly. Neither side will have wanted a state visit, that pinnacle of dignity where everything is worked out to the last detail, to be happening against the background of street protests. It wouldn't have looked good. For President Macron, as Lucy was saying, he, I think, will have been sensitive right at the moment to images of him hosting a king in the opulent splendour of the Palace of Versailles. So for those reasons, the French decided to pull the plug, at least for the time being.
OK, Nick, many thanks. Nicholas Witchell reporting. School inspections in England have been under increased scrutiny after Ruth Perry, a head teacher in Reading, took her own life in January when her school was downgraded. Today, the Chief Inspector of Schools, Amanda Spielman, said inspections will continue despite some calls for them to be paused. It's now emerged that Ms Spielman made an informal visit to Ruth Perry's school in 2019 and that Ms Perry had said the feedback then was glowing. Here's our education editor, Branwen Jeffries.
From an Ofsted inspection at this primary and the suicide of the head teacher while waiting for the report, a national debate has been released. For Ruth Perry, this was her first inspection as head teacher, but the BBC has learnt Ofsted inspectors made an informal visit in 2019. The Chief Inspector, Amanda Spielman, was an observer. In a newsletter to parents, Ruth Perry said the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. After a formal inspection 3 years later, the school was rated inadequate.
Of busy work and busy play.
Sophie Greenaway is a head teacher at a nearby school. Before that, she worked with Ruth at Caversham Primary.
It would have been soul-destroying, that word, inadequate, that her school, that I know is absolutely fantastic and a wonderful place to be. It's amazing. And to be defined in one word as inadequate, that would have, destroyed her. It would have done.
Ofsted said in a statement earlier, inspections are in children's best interests. Our aim is to raise standards so that all children get a great education. It is an aim we share with every teacher in every school. Inspection plays an important part. Ofsted added it includes checking that teachers know what to do if children are being abused or harmed. It was on the basis of training and record keeping on safeguarding that Caversham Primary went from the top grade of outstanding to the bottom inadequate. Ofsted inspections look at many different aspects of what's going on in school. Each one of those is given a grade. But at the end of the whole process, the school itself is given one single grade. And if there are failings in just one area, it can be marked down. Head teachers' unions want that one grade judgment replaced.
We think a report that perhaps outlined a school's strengths and its areas for improvement would not only be useful for parents in making a choice, but also be useful for the profession in moving and improving schools for the future.
But some in charge of schools think the current system works.
The value of the four judgments of the different key areas of the school and the one overall judgment is it gives parents who are not specialists in education a clear and consistent overall evaluation.
So do parents in Leeds rely on Ofsted grades?
I prefer to look around the school, see what the atmosphere is like myself, and if I know the teachers, see how friendly the teachers are.
I do check the Ofsted reports, but I usually ask to see what's a good school and what's not. You usually know by when people tell you.
Safety, nice environment, good teachers. These are absolutely brilliant in here, I can't fault them. It's like a big family, so that to me is more than any Ofsted report.
Change may be on the way for Ofsted. This debate will shape it. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News.
And you can see more on this story by going to the BBC iPlayer and searching for Tested to the Limit. Shares in banks across Europe have fallen sharply in value. Germany's Deutsche Bank led the slide, dropping more than 14% at one point and ending the day down more than 8%. The sector is still reeling from the forced sale of Credit Suisse and the sudden collapse of two US lenders. UK banks, including Barclays and HSBC, also saw declines. The Prime Minister has held talks with Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, in London. Downing Street says Rishi Sunak told Israel's Prime Minister it was important to respect democratic values. There were protests in Westminster over Mr. Netanyahu's plans to give his right-wing government greater control over the judiciary, as well as over its ongoing treatment of Palestinians. BBC News has found some of the biggest companies providing the NHS with freelance doctors, nurses and other staff have seen their incomes rise by tens of millions of pounds since 2019. 3 companies alone saw their combined income go up by more than £200 million during that time. In December, it emerged that a hospital trust spent more than £5,000 for a single shift from an agency doctor. Our health editor Hugh Pym is here to explain. Hugh.
Yes, Rita, the revelations come at a time of increasing scrutiny of taxpayer-funded agency costs, with health leaders saying workforce shortages leave them no choice than to spend more money on freelance staff. We looked at financial records of agency firms providing temporary workers, including 3 of the biggest. Medax Healthcare, which says it's the largest supplier of locum doctors to the NHS, reported an 80% increase in turnover to almost £161 million between 2019 and 2021. ID Medical Group, which said it's the largest UK provider of healthcare professionals to the NHS, had a turnover of £145 million in 2022, 15% up on 2019. And Independent Clinical Services, which trades as Thornbury Nursing Group and Scottish Nursing Guild, had a turnover of nearly £273 million in 2021, up 77.5% on 2019. It says the NHS accounts for less than half of turnover. We asked one NHS leader to take a look at our data.
So this is the spreadsheet with our figures.
Sir Julian Hartley has run hospitals in Manchester and Leeds. He's now Chief Executive of NHS Providers, representing trusts in England.
Well, I think these figures underlines the pressure that the NHS is under right now. It's the most operationally challenged time that I can remember in the service, and certainly all trusts are desperate to reduce those costs and indeed reduce the reliance on agency. If we were to spend that money on permanent staff, that would go a long way to supporting the agenda that we've got.
Agencies say they're helping the NHS by providing staff at short notice when needed, and it suits some of them to be freelance.
Many of the agency staff we speak to, they say that they do this because it's the only way they can get flexibility in their work. It helps them manage burnout, it helps them manage their work-life balance and all the other responsibilities they might have in their life, and they can't get that by being permanently employed by the NHS.
In response to our inquiries, Medax said we're proud to partner with the NHS to provide them with a round-the-clock supply of healthcare workers. ID Medical, which paid one of its directors more than £800,000 last year, said we continue our commitment to driving costs down further in partnership with the NHS through our broad range of sustainable solutions. And Independent Clinical Services said we recognise the strain the NHS and other care providers are under and proactively work with customers to support strategic workforce provision. The NHS has its own official staff banks which offer extra shifts when employers have gaps to fill. The Department of Health and Social Care said spending was controlled by a cap on hourly agency pay and that a long-term workforce plan would be published soon for England. For health leaders, any plan which commits to more nurses and doctors and reduces the need for agency spending can't come a moment too soon. Rita.
Hugh, thank you. The Hollywood actress Gwyneth Paltrow has been giving evidence in a trial where she's accused of causing a ski crash which left a man with brain damage and broken ribs. Terry Sanderson is suing the star over the incident in Utah in 2016. He wants $300,000 in damages. Gwyneth Paltrow has told the jury that Mr. Sanderson crashed into her and she'd feared that she was the victim of a deliberate assault. Sophie Long has sent this report.
Gwyneth Paltrow has been present throughout this trial, listening to emotional accounts from two of Terry Sanderson's daughters about the impact the accident had on their father. Today it was the Oscar-winning actress's turn to give her account of the collision that Mr. Sanderson says left him with a permanent brain injury and 4 broken ribs.
I was skiing and 2 skis came between my skis, forcing my legs apart, and then there was a body pressing against me. And there was a very strange grunting noise. So my brain was trying to make sense of what was happening. I thought, is this a practical joke? Is someone doing something perverted? This is really, really strange. My mind was going very, very quickly and I was trying to ascertain what was happening. Okay.
The jury must decide who hit whom on the slopes of Park City, an upmarket ski resort which is home to the Sundance Film Festival and attracts throngs of celebrities. Ms. Paltrow is accused not just of causing the crash, but also of skiing off without checking if Mr. Sanderson was hurt.
At the time of the collision, were you aware of the rule that if you're in a collision, you need to share your name, your contact information with the person that you're involved in a collision with?
I don't think I was aware of the rule.
Okay. Were you aware that there is kind of a rule of common decency to do that?
I would not have left the scene without leaving my information, and my information was left.
Did you provide that information?
No, Eric Christensen, who was the ski instructor with us, said he would leave all the information.
He wants her to be held accountable. She wants to clear her name. Any victory will be a moral one. Sophie Long, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Now, it's a simple picture drawn by a child in protest at the war in Ukraine, but it's ripped a Russian family apart. The 13-year-old schoolgirl who drew this has been removed from her father after her school reported her to the police. Her father is being prosecuted for anti-war posts on social media. Steve Rosenberg reports now from the town of Yefremov.
This is the last time Masha Moskalyova was seen in public. Police had just detained her father for anti-war social media posts. Masha was taken to a children's home. It was on March the 1st. But the story began last year with a picture. 12-year-old Masha drew it at school. Glory to Ukraine, it says. No to war, as Russian missiles fly in. Then the problems started. Town councillor Olga Podolskaya says Masha's father, a single parent, contacted her to say the school, shocked by the drawing, had called the police.
Her father, Alexei, told me he was dumbfounded. Then the police began checking his social media. They told him he was bringing up his daughter in a bad way. The authorities want everyone to toe the line. No one is allowed to have their own opinion.
Alexei is under house arrest and not allowed to talk to us. Since Masha drew that picture, he's been charged twice with discrediting the Russian army. He could now be sent to prison. His lawyer says Alexei is distraught without his child.
Alexei is very worried about his daughter. He doesn't know what's happening to her. The social services seem obsessed with this family. I think that's purely for political reasons. The family's problems only began after the girl drew that picture.
We tried contacting Masha's school to get its side of the story. School number 9 didn't respond to a written request for comment. So we went along there. But were told, no, we couldn't come in. We tried calling. Same result. Across town, supporters of the family gathered in court. Return Masha to her father, it says. The local Juvenile Affairs Commission is taking legal action to restrict Alexei's parental rights. The Commission has yet to respond to our request for comment.
Alexei Moskalyov had wanted to come here to court, but he wasn't allowed to interrupt his house arrest to be here, even though what's at stake is whether his rights as a father are going to be restricted and whether his child will be taken away from him.
Local activists are doing what they can to help, buying food and supplies for father and daughter. But when we ask the Moskalyovs' neighbours what they think, they're reluctant to say. I'm scared to, Angelina says. I'm frightened to answer. Sorry, she says, I won't express an opinion. And that too paints a picture of today's Russia, of the level of fear. Dissent is unacceptable, punishable. What those in power here expect is people's support, no matter what decisions are taken. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Yefremov, Russia.
The race to succeed Nicola Sturgeon as leader of the Scottish National Party is entering its final weekend. 3 candidates are left. Humza Yousaf is the current Health Secretary and MSP for Glasgow Pollock. He's joined by Kate Forbes, who's the SNP's Finance Secretary. She's represented Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch since 2016. And they're both joined in the race by Ash Regan, a former Cabinet Minister who was also elected in 2016, representing Edinburgh Eastern. Well, to become leader, they'll be fighting for the votes of over 70,000 SNP members. The result will be announced on Monday afternoon. Meanwhile, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer visited a wind farm in the far north of Scotland today, and he told the BBC the SNP is imploding. Our Scotland editor James Cook reports.
Keeping the faith as Judgment Day approaches for the SNP. Kate Forbes, a devout Christian, met Muslim worshippers at this Lanarkshire mosque in the first week of Ramadan and the last weekend of the leadership campaign.
My priorities are the people's priorities, and that includes tackling the cost of living crisis. It includes reforming our public services and dealing with poverty, and obviously making the case for independence, setting out how Scotland can be wealthier and fairer as an independent country.
It can be quite robust, and there has been some interesting moments, I think it's fair to say.
After Friday prayers at his mosque, Humza Yousaf was keen to play down the disruptive and divisive nature of the race.
And my message is a really simple one. If you want, the next leader of the SNP to continue to build on that progressive agenda that has won us election after election, if you want us to have somebody who will build the team that will unite and deliver independence, then I'm the person that you should put as your number one choice.
Ash Regan, by contrast, plays up her role as a disruptor with this message for members.
If they're in the SNP because they want Scottish independence, they really only have one candidate to choose from, and that's me. I'm the only one that's got a credible plan for independence. I'm committed to that, and I want Scotland to work towards being an independent country as soon as possible, because I see that as being the best way that we can get the Scotland that we all want to live in.
The twists and turns of this contest have been compelling viewing for voters in Scotland, but it also matters throughout the UK. The SNP currently hold 45 of the 59 Scottish seats at Westminster, which means their pain could be Labour's gain. Sir Keir Starmer knows that, of course. He's here to highlight Labour's plans for renewable energy and green jobs, and also because he spies a political opportunity in the offing.
The SNP is imploding. I think everybody can see that. Whatever you think of Nicola Sturgeon, she was, a giant in Scottish politics, and I think there's a massive gulf between her and any of the candidates to replace her. And what that implosion has shown, I think, is that the SNP's run out of road when it comes to the case for independence, and that's shone a light on their record.
Why has Labour done so badly in Scotland for so long?
Well, we did well for a long time, and then obviously we've not done so well recently, and I take that in all humility. And I think Labour lost its way and got too far from voters here in Scotland, and that's why I've spent a lot of time in Scotland listening, engaging, talking about the future.
Forward to a Labour government?
Maybe, maybe not. What is clear is Scotland will be a key battleground in the next general election. James Cook, BBC News, Wick.
One of the leading opposition figures in India has been disqualified from Parliament following his conviction for defamation. Rahul Gandhi was given a 2-year prison sentence for remarks about the Prime Minister's surname, Modi, in a speech that he gave 4 years ago. His allies have accused the governing BJP party of trying to silence opposition voices. Our correspondent Yogita Limai is in Mumbai for us. Is he being silenced, Yogita?
Rita, it's extremely rare for someone to get a jail term for defamation in India. Rahul Gandhi's party, the Congress, has called the court's verdict erroneous and bizarre. They've said it's a politically motivated move by the ruling party, the BJP. The case was registered by a member of the BJP. The court which delivered the judgment is in Prime Minister Modi's home state. The BJP saying this is the court's decision and the Congress shouldn't criticise the judiciary. It comes against the backdrop of a number of cases being registered and raids being conducted against leaders of different opposition parties. That's perhaps why we've seen so many of them today rally in support of Mr. Gandhi, one leader saying this is a new low for Indian democracy. Mr. Gandhi has said that he is fighting for the voice of India and will pay any price that is required for it. He isn't expected to be jailed. He can appeal against the verdict, but he cannot contest elections. National elections are due next year unless that sentence is suspended or he's acquitted. It is a rare moment in Indian politics. Whether or not it's a seminal moment in terms of uniting the opposition against the BJP, we'll see in the days and weeks to come.
Thank you. Yogita Limai reporting there. The BBC has paused plans to scrap the BBC Singers, the UK's only full-time professional chamber choir, after a public backlash against the move. The Singers were due to be axed just before their centenary because of BBC budget cuts, but now the corporation says they will continue performing while it looks at other ways of funding them, as our media correspondent David Silito reports.
The BBC Singers are part of British musical life for nearly 100 years. However, what began as the wireless chorus of 1924 didn't look as though it was going to make it to its centenary year. The BBC said it had to make cuts. The choir would close in September. However, there's been a U-turn. And in the queue for today's concert, there was relief that Britain's only full-time salaried professional choir looks to have been saved.
It's something to aspire to, certainly for young singers coming up professionally.
I just read on my phone now that they have a reprieve and I'm absolutely delighted.
The country doesn't respect really how good they are.
The threat to the singers had provoked widespread protest. The conductor, Sir John Eliot Gardiner, said it was a scandal. 140,000 people signed a petition. But the BBC, which has 5 orchestras and a choir, is under huge pressure to cut costs. Its income has dropped by around 40% in real terms in recent years. And today's announcement has only happened because of an offer of financial support from 2 as yet unnamed external organisations. There are high hopes, but there's still much to discuss.
I don't see this as a U-turn at all, actually. What this is we are still going to deliver our plans, but we're able to do it whilst keeping hold of the BBC Singers, and that's a really good thing. I'm very delighted to be able to say that. And we're now able to do it by working in partnership with external colleagues as well.
Discussions are still ongoing, but hopes are high that the Singers' future is secure. They will definitely be a part of this year's proms. David Silito, BBC News.
Let's take a look at the weather now. Here's Louise Lear. Hello, Louise.
Hi there, Rita. Thank you very much. A British summertime just around the corner. We could all do with scenes like this, couldn't we? Beautiful afternoon in North Yorkshire, but it wasn't the case everywhere. We had some real torrential, thundery downpours through the day today. In fact, in Wiltshire, we had just shy of an inch of rain. And there's more sunshine and showers to come for the start of our weekend. The blustery winds that we've had today, though, will gradually start to ease down. So this is how we're going to start Saturday. Some sunshine around first thing in the morning, a few showers as well as we go through the day. And the showers are going to be fairly organised through the afternoon and a little bit further north than we had today. So we will see a bit of drier, brighter weather, a few isolated showers across the southwest, but generally temperatures sitting at around 13 or 14 degrees. East Anglia, northern England up into Northern Ireland. Here's where we'll see a rash of sharp, possibly thundery downpours, a little more cloud into Scotland. Brighter skies but colder weather already starting to show its hand further north. So top temperatures in the Northern Isles of just 5 degrees as that northerly wind kicks in. There's going to be more rain, some of it heavy and persistent through the night Saturday into Sunday morning, pushing its way south and east. And that may well linger first thing on Sunday as well. But once it clears away, once it sinks south and east, it's going to allow this cooler air source to arrive, albeit fairly briefly. So on Sunday, maybe a bit of a cloudy, damp start across the southeast of England, and then brighter skies following on behind, fewer showers around. But what showers we're likely to see in the far north of Scotland, they could turn wintry anywhere above 200 metres. So a cooler day across England and Wales, cold in the far north of Scotland. And it's worth bearing in mind, if you have forgotten, that British summertime begins during the early hours of Sunday morning. We spring forward. Thank goodness. Rita.
Louise, thank you. And in the last few minutes, the Queen's final honours list has been announced. Amongst those honoured are the 8 pallbearers who carried the Queen's coffin. They've been awarded the Silver Royal Victorian Medal in recognition of the important role that they played at her funeral. Well, there is more on that on the BBC website. And there's also more analysis of the day's main stories on Newsnight with Faisal Islam. That's just getting underway on BBC Two. And the news continues here on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. But from the 10 o'clock team, it's good night.